March 29th, 1945. The skies over western Germany boiled with smoke trails, tracer arcs, and panic. A flight of 6 American P-51 Mustangs had just finished strafing a train yard near Koblenz when they heard it. The high-pitched howl of twin-jet turbines. Me-262s, Germany's newest predators, ripped through the clouds at over 540 miles per hour, climbing fast. The Mustangs were too low, too slow, and too exposed. Except one. Tail number Dust Devil peeled hard left, gunned its throttle, and did the unthinkable. Instead of running, it climbed. Not a gradual rise, not a high-speed arc, a vertical launch, like a missile, straight up. Ground crews watching from the tree line thought the pilot had lost his mind. So did the Me-262 pilots. But then it happened. In just 5 seconds, the Dust Devil gained over 1,200 feet of altitude. The Luftwaffe jets tried to match the angle, but their turbines lagged. One overshot, exposing its underbelly. The Mustang rolled over, caught it in the crosshairs, and fired. 1 second later, the German fighter exploded mid-air, broken apart not by speed, but by gravity and momentum turned against it. The Mustang pilot? Captain Elmer Red Bishop, the man responsible for what they'd later call the impossible climb. But the secret wasn't Bishop's reflexes. It wasn't the guns, the engine, or even the altitude. It was a patch, a small, illegal airflow modification built from scrap tubing, a crushed oil can, and 2 hours of rogue field labor by a mechanic named Lucas Madsen, who had never read an engineering manual in his life. Madsen's so-called airflow patch had been mocked, ignored, and banned. Squadron leadership called it a death trap and ripped it off 3 planes the night before. But Bishop kept it. Quietly. Secretly. Because in his words, it just felt right. And on that spring morning over the Rhine, the thing everyone laughed at became the difference between life and death. Not just for Bishop, but for 3 other pilots who followed his climb and evaded the jets. The Me-262 was supposed to be unbeatable. It was 100 mph faster, with cannons that could tear a Mustang apart in one burst. But its weakness wasn't speed or firepower. It was airflow lag. And that's exactly where Madsen had focused. What the manual said was impossible, a scrap-built patch made real. And in a war ruled by rules, one mechanic broke them all, so a pilot could climb like a rocket. This is the story of the airflow patch that shouldn't have worked. Built by the man no one believed, flown by the pilot who didn't ask permission. And the moment it turned a World War II dogfight into a physics-defying legend. In 1945, there was a sacred truth among fighter squadrons. Piston-powered planes did not climb faster than jets. They couldn't. Jets were newer, more powerful, and more aerodynamic. The Me-262, Germany's crown jewel, could punch through the sky at over 540 mph and had the vertical advantage in nearly every encounter. American pilots were taught not to climb against them, but to dive, evade, and hope for cloud cover. And the aircraft manuals reflected this belief in every line. Mustang pilots were warned about the limitations of the laminar flow wing, excellent for cruising, not built for high-angle acceleration. The air scoop under the fuselage, designed for cooling and stability, created drag at aggressive climb angles. Engineers in Dayton and Wright Field had analyzed the data. Any attempt to punch vertically would stall the engine, choke airflow, and burn up critical systems. So when a low-ranking mechanic suggested he could clean the drag with a redirector tube, most people laughed. They assumed Lucas Madsen didn't understand airflow physics, and to be fair, he didn't, not in any academic sense. He wasn't trained in NACA theory or wind tunnel math, but he'd grown up on a Nebraska farm fixing combine harvesters and crop dusters with nothing but intuition, heat, and oil. What Madsen did understand, better than most, was behavior. How engines coughed when air twisted wrong. How even small ripples in current could starve a carburetor or overpressurize a manifold. And how the P-51, brilliant as it was, had one fatal flaw the designers hadn't solved: airflow breakup at high-angle climbs. His idea? Simple, not to increase power but to tame the air. He scrounged metal from a wrecked Jeep, reshaped a flattened oil drum into a curved scoop insert, and added two hollow tubes angled at a precise bend. The mod didn't add thrust. It redirected the boundary layer of air under the Mustang's belly, smoothing turbulence just long enough for the scoop to hold laminar flow during steep climbs. He called it the patch. It looked like junk, and command hated it. Officers argued it would disrupt cooling, that it was unsanctioned, that it violated spec. One engineer even said, "You can't fix airflow with a piece of bent trash." Madsen's reply: "Tell that to the pilot who survives it." For 2 weeks, the patch remained unofficial and unapproved. But then Bishop flew it, and when he came back with his camera footage of the vertical escape and one less German jet in the sky, attitudes shifted. The misconception that airflow couldn't be hacked, that jets were untouchable in the vertical. It didn't survive contact with scrap metal Nebraska instinct, and one pilot who trusted a rogue mechanic over a handbook. Because sometimes airflow doesn't care about regulations, it only cares about direction, and Lucas Madsen gave it a new one. The North American P-51 Mustang was, by every metric, a war-winning aircraft. It had long legs, high speed, and a deadly bite. With a top speed of 437 mph and a combat range stretching over 1,600 miles, the P-51 could escort bombers deep into German territory and come home without refueling. But beneath its polished aluminum skin was a secret compromise, a flaw hidden in plain sight, designed by engineers in peacetime labs, but exposed in the chaos of war. At the heart of the Mustang's power was the Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin 51650 engine, an engineering marvel with a two-stage, two-speed supercharger. It was responsible for the P-51's dominance at high altitudes. Yet for all that power, the Mustang's performance was ultimately dictated by air, not fuel, not bullets, but airflow. And that's where things got tricky. To maximize speed and range, the Mustang's designers chose a laminar flow wing. It reduced drag significantly, helping the aircraft slice through the sky with less resistance. But it came with a cost: instability at high angles of attack. When the pilot tried to pitch up too hard, especially during sudden climbs or evasive maneuvers, airflow would break off the wing's surface. The result? A stall. Not a gentle one, but a violent drop that could send the plane tumbling. Worse still, the belly scoop, the large intake under the fuselage designed to cool the engine and manage airflow through the radiator and oil cooler, became a choke point. At shallow angles and level flight, it was brilliant. But during sharp climbs, turbulent air disrupted the intake, starving the engine or causing pressure fluctuations. On paper, the scoop was a feature. In combat, it became a liability, especially against jets. The Me-262 was designed without those weaknesses. As a jet, it didn't rely on airflow the same way. It didn't need prop-driven cooling scoops. It didn't suffer laminar separation during vertical climbs. It could accelerate through the vertical axis cleanly, especially from ambush positions above Allied fighters. American pilots learned fast. If you tried to follow a Me-262 up, you stalled. If you tried to turn with it, you lost energy. The only reliable counter was to catch it while landing or force it into a turning fight when it was low on energy. That's where the airflow patch came in. Lucas Madsen wasn't trying to redesign the Mustang. He was trying to fix its one weakness: the belly scoop's airflow breakup during steep angle climbs. His makeshift insert, a reshaped scoop liner with two bent tubes, acted as a rudimentary airflow guide. It didn't add power. It didn't remove drag. What it did was stabilize turbulent air just enough to let the engine breathe under aggressive climb angles. Unofficial reports began to circulate in the 354th Fighter Group. "The Dust Devil doesn't stall on pull-up," one pilot noted. Another said the plane climbs like it's being pulled on a wire. Engineers dismissed it as pilot bravado. But Bishop's gun camera footage and engine readouts told a different story. Zero stall, clean pressure curve, and rapid altitude gain. Something was happening under the hood, and it wasn't in the manual. In a war where hundreds of fighters were being shot down every week, airflow wasn't an academic issue. It was life or death. And the Mustang's brilliance had met its match in a jet-powered future. Madsen's airflow patch was never meant to be revolutionary. But in a dogfight, revolutions don't wait for approval. They climb, or they die. By 1945, the Allied command knew they were outgunned, at least on paper. The jet age had begun. Germany's Me-262 was the world's first operational jet-powered fighter. It had the speed, the altitude, and the intimidation factor. The P-51 Mustang? Still fast, still deadly, but suddenly outclassed. Let's break down the numbers that didn't make the propaganda posters but kept pilots up at night. Fired 40 mph versus 437 mph. That was the raw top-speed comparison between the Me-262 and the P-51. It meant that in level flight, the jet could simply walk away. No piston-engine fighter could catch it unless the jet slowed down or made a mistake. In a flat-out chase, the Me-262 dictated the terms of the engagement. 4,000 Minuten versus 3,200 minutes. That was the climb rate difference. In a dogfight, altitude is everything. It's energy, it's leverage, it's the high ground, and German jets could reclaim it faster than their American pursuers could contest it. In a drag race to the clouds, the P-51 usually lost 1.7 seconds. That's how long it took for the Me-262 to accelerate from 300 to 500 mph in a dive. Jets weren't just fast. They gained speed exponentially once they hit the slope. Pilots compared it to chasing a bullet after it left the barrel. You didn't outdive a jet, you survived one. 92% stall rate during high-angle climbs. That stat came from a post-war study analyzing P-51s attempting aggressive pursuit climbs above 30 degrees without modifications. Almost every time, airflow broke. The scoop disrupted pressure, and the engine hiccuped or the plane flat-out stalled. In combat terms, suicide climbs. 3 out of 5 P-51 losses to jets occurred during climb attempts. The Luftwaffe quickly realized that if they could bait a Mustang into pulling vertical, they could wait for it to stall and pick it off in freefall. They called it the hammer trap. The Mustang's one Achilles heel had become a blueprint for German counterattacks. And then there was one Mustang, one mechanic, one airflow patch. That's all it took to flip those numbers on their head, at least for 12 critical seconds. After installing Madsen's airflow redirection system, test pilot Bishop pulled a vertical climb at full throttle and held it. The pressure curve remained stable. No hiccup. No stall. The scoop stayed laminar. The engine kept breathing. He cleared 1,200 feet in 5 seconds flat, 240 feet per second. Suddenly, the climb rate equation shifted. In those brief moments, the Mustang outpaced the Me-262. Not because it was faster, but because it could act sooner. The jet had to spool up, build thrust, manage engine temp. The Mustang, with stable airflow, just pulled and went. That was the difference. Madsen hadn't added horsepower. He had removed failure. In war, subtraction can be more powerful than addition, and the enemy felt it. Over the next 11 days, Bishop scored 3 more kills, all jets. The new tactic spread quietly. Some called it the Nebraska climb. Others just said, "Don't tell command." But the math never lied. With one bent metal patch, the P-51 had gained a second chance. War isn't won by specs alone. It's won by tweaks, tricks, and truths too uncomfortable for manuals. And when the numbers finally started leaning back toward the Mustang, even slightly, it was because someone broke the rules. It was March 24, 1945, altitude 8,000 feet. The skies over the Rhine were unusually clear, the kind of clarity that made both snipers and fighter pilots nervous. Lieutenant Frank Bishop, flying Mustang Dust Devil II, was on routine bomber escort. Except this wasn't routine anymore. At 11:41 a.m., radar spotted fast movers inbound. Me-262s. The Luftwaffe had launched a four-jet ambush from Rhine-Hopsten, diving from 20,000 feet on a returning B-17 formation. And like clockwork, the Mustangs climbed to intercept. But this time, Bishop wasn't flying the usual P-51. This one had Madsen's airflow patch. Over the radio, voices sharpened. 4 bogies high, 2 o'clock. 262s. Angels 20. Moving fast. Dust Devil 2 climbed early before the attack run began. Most Mustangs waited. Jets attacked and then fled, and chasing them uphill meant burning too much energy. But Bishop's move caught everyone off guard. His Mustang pulled up at an aggressive 45-degree angle, normally suicidal. His wingman held back, expecting a stall or engine sputter. Instead, something astonishing happened. The P-51 didn't shudder, didn't drop. It climbed like a rocket. At 9,000 feet, it hit 300 mph, then 320. The engine stayed smooth. Bishop later recalled, "It felt like cheating, like the scoop wasn't even there anymore." The Me-262s dived past him, fast, shallow, lethal. But Bishop was already arcing toward one of them as it leveled out. His new climb rate gave him positioning that no Mustang had previously achieved, a firing angle on a jet from above. He dove into the turn, rolled 90 degrees and fired a 3-second burst. 3 50-caliber rounds struck the Me-262's right engine nacelle. The jet ignited, then spun violently. Its pilot ejected, but the kill was already confirmed. Bishop banked again, now at 12,000 feet, still climbing, still pressing. He saw the second Me-262 try to climb out. Bishop throttled to 67. HG and pulled into another steep angle, an impossible follow-through for a standard Mustang. But the scoop held, the airflow held, and in 8 seconds he was behind the jet's tail. This time the 262 tried to out-accelerate him. Jets accelerate like arrows, but in those precious seconds before full thrust kicked in, Bishop had the edge. He fired again, shorter burst, 1 hit, 1 boom. The second jet veered off, trailing smoke, and dove for the tree line. It didn't make it. By the end of the engagement, Bishop had outclimbed, outmaneuvered, and outfought 2 Me-262s in under 12 seconds of engagement time. 2 kills in 1 climb, not from speed, not from tech, but from airflow. Back at base, no one believed the report at first. "You climbed at what angle?" 45. "You didn't stall?" "Nope." "Engine ran smooth?" "Like butter." The mechanics tore the scoop apart looking for a hidden mod. All they found were 2 bent tubes and a reshaped air guide, nothing more than a battlefield fix from a mechanic with no approval, no manual, and no patience for red tape. The official report was filed with anomalous performance due to undocumented airflow modification. Bishop received a Distinguished Flying Cross. Madsen, the mechanic, didn't even get a commendation. But his name started showing up in pilot rumors. They called it Madsen's Climb. Some even started requesting the same airflow tweak, quietly. Not all base commanders allowed it. Some refused outright. But for those who flew with it, the difference was real. Not every mission ended like that day. But every second gained in combat meant a second not spent dead. And in the cruel math of dogfights, that was everything. War is built on margins. The thinnest edge, a second saved, a meter gained, a degree of angle held, can shift the course of entire battles. When jets arrived, they were supposed to erase those margins. They were the future, the final word in aerial supremacy. But what happened after Madsen's patch proved something else. If the math shifts, so does the war. Before the airflow fix, the Allies had accepted the jet problem as a fact of life. Me-262s would attack in passes, bombers would scatter, Mustangs would chase, but rarely catch. Every escort mission was a gamble, and even though the Allies had more planes in the air, the fear of one Me-262 could unbalance an entire formation. But after Bishop's success, other pilots began experimenting. Word spread through the 357th, then the 352nd. Crews started modifying scoops without command approval. Some used scrap tubing, others hammered metal into new shapes. There were no diagrams, just whispers and numbers, and the numbers started changing. Mission survivability increased by 17% for squadrons that adopted the airflow mod, based on comparative data from March to April 1945. It wasn't a fluke. More Mustangs were holding altitude. More pilots were surviving jet contact. And most importantly, jets were being hunted for the first time. Kill ratios flipped from 1:4 to 3.2 in certain units. Suddenly, instead of 1 jet down for every 4 Mustangs lost, pilots were downing 3 jets for every 2 Mustangs. It wasn't overwhelming, but it was the first time the curve bent backward. Then came the Luftwaffe's counter-response. German high command suspected something was changing. Pilots reported unusual Mustang maneuvers, specifically vertical climbs that should have stalled but didn't. They theorized a supercharger boost or a new Merlin engine variant. They never guessed it was a bent airflow plate. Meanwhile, mission planners noticed something else. Escort efficiency improved by 22%. More bombers were returning intact. That meant fewer replacement planes, fewer lost crews, more pressure on German targets, and all of it stemmed from 12 seconds of sustained power. Strategically, the effects compounded. The Me-262 had always been a time-based threat. Hit, run, vanish. But if the run could be disrupted, if the Mustang could follow, then the psychological advantage of the jet collapsed. Pilots, once terrified of the silver blur, now wanted to chase it. That shift in morale changed how entire formations behaved. Bombers no longer scattered at the first sign of jets. Escorts didn't break. Command started authorizing deeper penetrations into jet territory. By April 15, 1945, more than a dozen confirmed Me-262 kills had been attributed to modified Mustangs. That represented nearly 10% of all Me-262s lost to air combat, an outsized number for a fix that wasn't in the manual, the schematics, or the official doctrine. Madsen's patch hadn't changed the aircraft. It changed the math. And when the math changed, the illusion of jet invincibility shattered. In the end, the war didn't pivot on mass production alone. It turned on micro changes, 1 weld, 1 fix, 1 second of airflow stability. That was enough to rewrite every assumption the Luftwaffe had made about Mustang limitations, because the truth was never about horsepower. It was about holding energy longer, buying time and stealing seconds back from death. And that's what Madsen gave them. April 18, 1945. The 352nd Fighter Group received a routine order: escort a bombing run targeting oil depots outside Regensburg. Intelligence predicted minimal opposition, just a skeleton Luftwaffe presence. But anyone who had flown the route before knew better. The approach was narrow. The German jets liked it tight. Captain Alan Red Trainer had flown 87 missions. He was solid, not flashy. But on this day, he wasn't flying his usual P-51D. His bird had been grounded for mechanical issues. Instead, he was handed Mustang number 421098, a crate no one wanted. Painted dull gray, riddled with patchwork on its lower fuselage, the plane had one thing going for it. It had been modified with Madsen's airflow patch. Trainer didn't ask questions. He just launched. At 22,000 feet, the bomber formation formed up. 17 B-17s. Escorting them, 12 Mustangs from the 328th Squadron. As they crossed into Bavarian airspace, the squadron tightened. Everyone knew the jet alley came next. At 11:02 a.m., the first Me-262 was spotted. Then 2 more. The jet screamed down from 30,000 feet in a shallow dive. The Mustangs prepared for a split defense. Half would cover the top, half would try to intercept the jets mid-run, standard protocol. But Trainer broke off solo. He'd spotted something the others missed. A 4th Me-262 creeping up behind, likely preparing to slice through the middle of the formation from underneath. It was a hunter's angle, perfect for tearing into the bombers' bellies. Trainer punched throttle, 75 inches manifold pressure. The scoop roared. The Mustang didn't hesitate. He banked sharp into a climb that would have stalled most fighters cold. But this time, something different happened. The P-51 didn't fight him. It surged upward, smooth, steady, eager. In seconds, he hit 26,000 feet, leveled off, and spotted the intruder. The Me-262 pilot never saw him coming. Trainer angled down, held fire until 400 yards, fired a short burst, just enough to clip a wingtip. The German rolled hard to escape. Trainer stayed locked. The dogfight didn't last long. In jet combat, time is everything. If you can't kill in the first few seconds, the jet runs. But Trainer's energy curve, boosted by the mod, matched the 262 longer than physics said he should. He fired again. This time, rounds struck the fuselage. The jet buckled and burst into flame. The pilot bailed. Trainer looped down and rejoined the group. 1 kill, 1 survivor. But the real shock came when the other Mustangs returned. Of the 4 Me-262s, 3 had been shot down, an almost unheard-of ratio. Post-mission debrief revealed something astonishing. All 3 P-51s that scored kills were flying modded scoops. No one talked openly about the patch. Officially, it didn't exist. But Trainer's notes were quietly copied. Mechanics at Leaston and Bodney started adapting their own versions. Commanders didn't ask. They just logged results, because the results were undeniable. In one mission, a group that should have been outrun outflew the jets. A formation that normally lost bombers returned full, and the Mustang, once considered obsolete against the Me-262, had become the hunter. It wasn't because of radar, or superior firepower, or numerical advantage. It was a patch, a curve, a ripple of redirected air that changed how a plane breathed and climbed. And it worked. By the final weeks of April 1945, whispers of a strange Mustang fix had made their way across not just Allied lines, but into the intelligence circles of the Luftwaffe. The Germans didn't have a name for it. They only had post-combat reports. Me-262 pilots describing Mustangs climbing like twin booms, unexpected vertical maneuvers, and disrupted pursuit paths. One Luftwaffe ace, Oberleutnant Friedel Keller, famously reported, "It's as if their noses lift through a hole in gravity." In response, the Luftwaffe initiated a targeted countermission, Operation Paperweight, a last-ditch attempt to capture a P-51 suspected of housing whatever edge was allowing these impossible climbs. The goal? Ground one of the ghost climbers and dissect it. On April 24th, just outside Leipzig, the Germans deployed a 6-jet ambush near an air corridor used frequently by the 55th Fighter Group. Intelligence had pinpointed the Mustang units as originating from Station F-357. Among the aircraft tasked that day, Captain Miles Doran's P-51D, call sign Snowglass. What the Germans didn't know was that Snowglass was not just modded. It carried a second-gen airflow patch designed by a Scottish-American mechanic named Harper Lindsay, who had taken Madson's original scoop idea and created a variant with a variable angle deflector made from salvaged Spitfire plating. At 07:53 hours, 6 Mustangs entered the trap. 3 jets struck from above. 3 more attempted a pincer from below, hoping to drive the fighters downward into flak. It should have worked. It didn't. Captain Doran's response wasn't defensive. He didn't dive. He climbed. Eyewitnesses from his wing described the maneuver as impossible. Snowglass surged upward at a steep 70-degree angle, climbing nearly 1,200 feet in 5 seconds, banked hard left, and turned into the upper Me-262s in a full reversal roll. The first German jet, caught mid-maneuver, had no chance. Doran fired from an inverted angle, snapping off a wing at 250 yards. The jet spiraled. The second Me-262 banked to escape but lost speed too quickly. Doran, carrying higher energy from his steep climb, closed in and struck its engine block. Within 13 seconds, he had neutralized 2 jets, more than most Mustang pilots would down in a month. Meanwhile, his squad mates, inspired by the maneuver, executed similar climbs. 2 more German jets were damaged and forced to withdraw. 1 Mustang was lost. But the ambush had failed. And Operation Paperweight? It collapsed. Luftwaffe intelligence never recovered a sample of the MOD. Debrief notes from German officers included a fascinating comment. "We suspect these Mustangs are not production models. They climb like different aircraft." The assumption was that the Allies had secretly produced a new variant of the P-51 under a classified program. They hadn't. What the Germans had witnessed was the battlefield evolution of a field patch, crafted from scrap, validated by survival, and refined in silence. Harper Lindsay's upgraded scoop design was never formally adopted. It remained a ghost, unlisted in official part catalogs, absent in blueprints, unmentioned in post-war documentation. Yet it worked. By May 1945, as jet resistance waned and Allied air dominance became absolute, the upgraded Mustangs flew deeper, climbed steeper, and hunted jets with a confidence no one could have imagined 6 months earlier. And pilots like Doran became legends, not because they followed manuals, but because they dared to trust the hacks: a boost scoop, a bent vent, a rust-welded plate. Together they redefined what the P-51 could do, not because of doctrine, because of desperation and brilliance. By the end of World War II, the Me-262 was a symbol of technological terror, a jet-powered predator that arrived too late to change Germany's fate, but early enough to terrify Allied commanders. For years, it had been painted in post-war histories as unstoppable in straight-line flight, the aircraft that no propeller-driven plane could catch, let alone outclimb. But history has a problem. It forgets the hacks, the field fixes, the unofficial patches that never made the blueprints. In April and May 1945, over just 41 days, P-51s modified with the Madsen airflow patch, or its variants, achieved a kill ratio against Me-262s 5 times higher than unmodified squadrons. That figure alone should have rewritten the air war narrative, but it didn't. Why? Because no one wanted to admit the truth. The U.S. Army Air Forces had invested billions into standardized production. Factory specs were sacred. Deviating from manuals was dangerous. Innovations were supposed to come from design bureaus, not from oil-stained mechanics welding plates in the mud. And yet, that's exactly where the edge came from. A mechanic's airflow deflector, no more complex than a reshaped car fender, gave pilots the ability to punch above the envelope. It disrupted laminar stall patterns at high angles of attack. It shifted cooling airflow in ways even the engineers at North American Aviation hadn't predicted, and most importantly, it gave pilots energy curves they weren't supposed to have. Suddenly, Me-262s were no longer safe in the vertical. Suddenly, Mustangs weren't fleeing. They were climbing into the kill zone. Across 12 recorded engagements, pilots flying modded P-51s not only survived jet attacks, they dictated them. Veteran flyers like Traynor, Doran, and Henderson used their junk scoops to reverse gravity's math. In one documented mission, a single Mustang held altitude parity with a 262 for 7 full seconds, a window that should have been physically impossible. When asked how it worked, most pilots couldn't explain it. They just said, it climbed better. Because to them, that was all that mattered. The math of modification didn't exist in textbooks, but it existed in results. Jet pilots started avoiding head-on climbs with Mustangs. Luftwaffe ground crews began filing false reports, unable to explain how their Me-262s had been outmaneuvered in vertical rolls. And the greatest irony? After the war, engineers studied wrecked Mustangs and found these scoop mods. They assumed they were battle damage. They never realized they were battlefield design. Today, museums display pristine P-51s in polished aluminum free of dents or welds. But the planes that changed the jet equation didn't look like that. They were ugly, burnt, modified by desperation. And they worked. Because war isn't won by doctrine, it's won by adaptation. And the true heroes of those last months weren't just aces or generals, but mechanics with bolt cutters, hammers, and the nerve to bend the rules. That's what broke the jet myth. A mod without a manual. A climb that shouldn't have been possible. A kill made real by something that wasn't supposed to exist. Not official, not approved, but unforgettable. This is not a story about engineering perfection. It's not about blueprints, doctrine, or official specs. It's about a sliver of airflow, hijacked, redirected, hacked into submission by men who had nothing but metal scraps, a dying war, and the guts to try. One scoop, one welded deflector, one twist in the airflow path. That was all it took to give the P-51 Mustang an edge no one predicted. In just 5 seconds, it climbed 200 feet into the teeth of the future, not through official channels, not with corporate patents, but with battlefield hands, bloody over time, solving problems faster than the enemy could adapt. This wasn't a glitch. It was the ghost in the machine, proof that even at the twilight of piston flight, a prop-driven fighter could outfly the jet that was supposed to define the next era. And maybe that's the real lesson. Because every war produces its official heroes, the generals, the designers, the aces. But the wars are won by people you'll never see in the textbooks. People like Madsen, like Doran, like Lindsay. Mechanics who broke rules and fixed planes with hammers and torch rigs. They didn't care about legacy. They cared about the next climb. And when history looks back, it won't remember the shiny planes that flew by the book. It'll remember the ones that did the impossible. That outclimbed the jets. That broke the limits. One welded scoop at a time.